Welcome to the heat video. Typically, I start by explaining how something works in general before moving on to illustrating that generality with a particular example. However, in the case of explaining heat, I'm going to start with a particular example before explaining how things work generally, because in particular, working with heat is very simple. Let's say we're piloting this awesome here. In the movement phase, suppose the mech runs. Running generates 2 points of heat. So we will go to our heat scale over here and put a little tick on the 2 to let us know that we generated 2 points of heat. Then let's say in the weapon attack phase, this mech fires 3 PPCs. You'll notice that each PPC generates 10 points of heat. So if we fire 3 of those, that's 3 times 10, 30. We generated 30 points of heat by firing the 3 PPCs. We add that 30 onto the 2 from before to yield 32 points of heat. You'll notice the heat scale only goes up to 30, and then we have an overflow box here where we write 32. It's much easier with a pencil. After the weapon attack phase comes the physical attack phase, but physical attacks generally don't generate heat unless you're using a vibro sword or something. And provided that this mech doesn't stand or walk into fire or get hit with a flamer or anything like that, this mech will generate no additional heat that turn. Now, none of this heat penalizes the mech. None of this heat takes effect until the heat phase. In the heat phase, we apply the heat sinks to dissipate the heat. You'll notice that this mech has 28 single heat sinks, meaning that it can dissipate 28 points of heat. And the mech generated 32 points of heat. So 32 minus 28 is 4. So the heat goes down to 4. And what we would do is we would erase this, and we would start the next turn at 4 heat. When we look at the heat data table, we see that our heat level is below 5, so we have no penalties to anything, because our heat's just not high enough. So when we move on to the next turn, let's say we run again, generate another 2 points of heat. That's 4, 5, 6, or up there. Let's say we fire 3 PPCs again. So that's 30 heat. 30 plus 6 is 36. So we write 36. And we got our 28 double heat sinks. So 36 minus 28 is going to be 8. So we start the next turn with 8 heat points. Then this is why we play the game with pencils or dry erase markers, because we have to do the slidey bar stuff. So we started the next turn at a heat scale of 8, and you'll notice down here we have a couple penalties, namely these two, because at 5 points of heat, we get -1 movement points. At 8 points of heat, we get a +1 modifier to fire. So at the start of this turn, we're going to want to adjust our movement points. Our walking speed is no longer 3. It's been reduced by 1. So our walking speed is now 2. Now our running speed is based off our walking speed, so our running speed gets reduced as well. We have to recalculate it. Our running speed is our walking speed times 1.5 rounded up. So 2 times 1.5 is 3. So I make a little 3 there. We can do this all in pencil at the table. So now we have our new walking and running speeds adjusted for the heat. And then when we go to shoot things, again, we add this +1 modifier to fire. And we'll do that once we're doing that whole gator thing. If you remember Gator. These are all the modifiers we use to hit things. And in the other category, we have a +1 at least for this penalty there. So let's say this mech at this point only fires 2 PPCs and only walks. So the mech walks, that generates 1 point of heat. Add that to the 8, we're now at 9. And then say we fire 2 PPCs, that's generating 20 points of heat, so 20 plus the 9 is 29. So we're right there at the heat scale. Assuming we don't walk into fire or get hit with any flamers or don't use a vibro sword or something like that. Once we get to the heat phase again, we'll be at 29 points of heat. And our 28 heat sinks can take care of that. Mostly. 29 minus 28 is 1. So we will be down to 1 point of heat at the start of the next turn. And we would just want to erase all that and start the next turn at 1 point of heat. And all of our penalties would go away. Now let's get into how everything works generally. You're going to want to know about this heat point table. It does reside on the cheat sheet found in the Box of Armored Combat that's black and white, but of course it's in the BattleTech manual and Total Warfare as well. And all this does is tell you what generates how much heat. You see, you have walking generates 1 heat per turn, running 2 heat per turn, and then all the rest. Attempting to stand generates heat per turn, and you can read, so I won't read all this to you, but that's an important table to know about. You will also want to know about the difference between single heat sinks and double heat sinks. As we saw from before, 28 single heat sinks will dissipate 28 points of heat. That means each single heat sink dissipates 1 point of heat. However, double heat sinks dissipate double the amount. So here we have a linebacker with 14 double heat sinks. That means this mech can dissipate 28 points of heat per turn because each double heat sink dissipates 2 points of heat. Now we see the heat data table big and color-coded. Let's start with the green penalties, which represent movement effects. If you recall from our awesome example, once the mech reached 8 points of heat, it applied to this 5 heat point movement penalty, which gave it a -1 movement points. Its walking speed was 3, so 3 minus 1 for the penalty is 2. The new walking speed is 2. Now if the awesome had gotten up to at least 10 heat points, but less than 15 heat points, the awesome would then have a -2 movement point penalty. So its walking speed would be reduced from 3 to 1, because 3 minus 2 is 1. Note that these penalties are not cumulative. This -2 movement point penalty does not cumulate on top of the previous -1 movement point penalty. So just because the awesome, or whatever mech you have, is at, say, 10 heat points, you subtract that 2 from its base walking MP, not from its already reduced walking MP, if its walking MP is already reduced. Now let's consider the weapon effect penalties, which are in orange, red, whatever. Anyway, you'll notice that once we reached 8 heat points in the awesome, we had a +1 modifier to fire. Now, if the awesome had gotten up to 13 hit points, it would have a +2 modifier to fire. And like the movement effect penalties, these weapon attack effect penalties are not cumulative. So once we get to 13 hit points, but less than 17 heat points, we only add a +2 modifier in the other category of our Gator modifiers. We don't add +2 +1, which would be 3 to our other category. Now let's talk about the shutdown effects in yellow. Supposing our mech generates at least 14 points of heat, but less than 18 points of heat, the mech pilot will have to roll a 4 or higher on 2d6 to override the shutdown and keep the mech from shutting down. If you play Mech Warrior Online, this is the pilot frantically trying to hit the O key. Once the mech shuts down, provided the Mech Warrior fails this roll, only life support and heat sinks still function in the mech. However, any heat generated by engine critical hits does not occur. Yet outside heat sources will still build up heat in the mech, so if the mech's standing in a fire, it's still going to get hot. On the next turn, during the next heat phase, a mech that's shut down can make another shutdown roll to try and restart it. However, this would only occur if the mech's heat is still at or above 14. Once the mech's heat drops below 14, the mech automatically starts back up. So if, say, on turn, we'll say 1, the mech's at 26 points of heat, and the pilot fails this roll by rolling less than 10, the mech shuts down. And during the next heat phase, they say the mech's now at 18 points of heat. In that next heat phase, the mech pilot will have to roll 2d6, and on a 6 or higher, the mech starts up again. That's how that works. And obviously, if your heat is at 30 or higher, the mech automatically shuts down. There's no overriding the shutdown at that point. When a mech shuts down, the Mech Warrior must immediately make a piloting skill roll at +3 to stay standing. And by immediately, I mean in the very heat phase that it shuts down. Failing this piloting skill roll results in an automatic fall, and naturally the mech becomes immobile because it shut down. Now let's talk about ammunition effects, which are in blue. When the heat rises to a certain level, as it has been for the other 3 effects, we have to roll equal to or greater than the appropriate number to stop the ammo from exploding. In the event that we do not meet this roll, the ammo that the mech has explodes. Not all of the ammo, necessarily. When an overheated mech's ammo explodes, the ammunition critical slot with the most destructive ammo per shot explodes first. Ammo per shot is defined as the damage value done by 1 turn's worth of shots. For example, the ammo per shot of a machine gun slot has a damage value of 2, a LRM 15 a damage value of 15, and an SRM 6 a damage value of 12. When the mech carries 2 ammo slots with equivalent per shot damage values, the mech's controlling player chooses which ammo explodes. All of the appropriate ammo type in a single critical slot explodes. If more than 1 critical hit slot holds the appropriate ammo type, the ammo with the most shots remaining explodes. If 2 or more locations have an equal number of shots remaining, randomly determine which one explodes. I've played at tables where if a mech has just enough ammo and there's an ammo explosion, we just assume the mech is destroyed because we don't want to go through all the math, and there's just so much ammo in there, it's probably going to be destroyed anyway. That's, of course, a house rule and not raw, but I've seen it done a lot. Additionally, you can see why mechs with no ammo, that is, laser boats, are very effective. Love the laser vomit because you don't have to worry about ammo exploding.